Have you ever felt that suffocating sensation, that inexplicable certainty that something is watching you, even when you know you're utterly alone? The night Jennifer decided to set foot inside the abandoned house at the end of the street, she felt exactly that, as though the air itself had eyes and teeth. They say that some houses are not built with bricks and wood, but with the memories of suffering, layered over years like sediment, trapping the screams of the forgotten between their walls. The house at the end of Hawthorne Street had been empty for over 4 decades, yet no one dared to so much as step on its creaking porch. Not out of respect, but out of primal fear. Jennifer had heard all the stories as a child. The whispers in school hallways, the warnings from elderly neighbors who crossed themselves when they walked past the property. But urban legends were just that, stories. Weren't they? The night she entered the house, the moon was nothing but a sliver of dead light, barely strong enough to cut through the mist rolling from the forest behind the property. Her breath steamed in the frigid air, and her pulse thundered in her ears as she approached the black maw of the front door. It was open, waiting for her. But let me ask you something. What drives a person to step willingly into the arms of a nightmare? Is it curiosity? Rebellion? Or something darker, something planted deep inside them long before they even knew it was there? Jennifer told herself it was just to prove a point, that the house was nothing but rotting wood and empty rooms. But as her foot crossed the threshold, she felt something shift. Not in the air, not in the house, but inside herself. The smell hit her first, a miasma of mold, decay, and something metallic, almost like blood. Her flashlight flickered as if protesting her decision, its weak beam struggling to cut through the thick, oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow light whole. The house was silent, but not in the comforting way of an empty place. No. This silence was predatory, expectant. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight, their agonized moans echoing through the hollow space. The wallpaper, once a cheery floral pattern, was now peeling like necrotic flesh, revealing scars of water damage and something else, something like claw marks etched into the plaster. She shivered, not just from the cold, but from the oppressive weight of the house's presence. It was as though the walls were breathing, slowly, in and out, matching her own erratic rhythm. And then, the door slammed shut behind her. Jennifer spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, but there was no wind, no movement, nothing. Just the suffocating certainty that she was no longer alone. Tell me, have you ever heard the sound of your own sanity cracking? Because that's what Jennifer heard in that moment. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked, deliberately. It wasn't the shifting of an old house settling into itself. No. This was a step. And another. Slow, heavy, approaching. The beam of her flashlight trembled as she lifted it toward the stairwell, her pulse screaming for her to run, but her legs locked in place, as though the house itself had reached through the floorboards and anchored her there. A shadow moved at the top of the stairs. Not a trick of the light. Not a figment of her terrified imagination. It was real, and it was watching her. But Jennifer couldn't scream. The air was thick, viscous, as though she were breathing through tar. Every instinct told her to flee, to turn around and claw at the door until her fingers bled. But the house wouldn't let her. Not yet. It wanted her to see, to understand, to suffer. And so, step by agonizing step, Jennifer moved deeper into the belly of the house, her every footfall echoing like a funeral toll through the empty corridors. If only she had known that she wasn't the first to walk this path, and she wouldn't be the last. Because the house at the end of the street isn't just abandoned. It's hungry. And it always gets what it wants. Hawthorne Street was the kind of place that seemed to fall out of time. Nestled on the outskirts of a small New England town, it was a narrow road flanked by skeletal trees, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky like desperate hands. The street was short, no more than 6 houses, but at its very end loomed the structure that had poisoned the neighborhood's name for decades, the house. Built in 1896 by the enigmatic carpenter Samuel Greaves, the house was meant to be his masterpiece. A towering Victorian structure with ornate gables and stained glass windows depicting unsettling, almost grotesque figures, it was a marvel for its time. But Greaves and his family never made it through the first winter. They were found in the parlor, lifeless, their mouths frozen in silent screams, their eyes wide with terror. No cause of death was ever determined. The house sat empty after that, changing hands several times over the next century. Every new occupant met with misfortune, disappearances, suicides, mysterious illnesses. Eventually, even the most desperate buyers left it to rot. The town council posted foreclosure signs, then condemnation notices, but no one dared enter the property to enforce them. And so the house stood, slowly being devoured by time and nature, a monument to its own dark legend. Jennifer Moore had grown up 3 streets away from Hawthorne. As a child, she'd ride her bike to the corner and stare at the house from a safe distance, daring herself to pedal a little closer. But she never did. Her grandmother had warned her in whispered tones, "That house feeds on the foolish." By the time Jennifer turned 24, she had left the town behind, trading its suffocating smallness for the anonymity of Boston. But after her grandmother's death, Jennifer was pulled back, not by grief, but by something she couldn't quite name. A gnawing curiosity. A hollow ache. Returning to her childhood home unearthed old ghosts. The familiar streets felt smaller, tighter, more claustrophobic than she remembered. And, of course, there was the house, still standing at the end of Hawthorne Street, its jagged silhouette cutting into the gray New England sky like a scar. Jennifer wasn't the reckless type. She had always prided herself on her logic, her practicality. Yet something about the house called to her. Not in a romantic, thrill-seeking way, but with a quiet, insistent pull, like gravity. It started with the dreams. The first night back, she dreamed of the house's front door slowly creaking open, revealing nothing but an endless void. She stood on the threshold, unable to move, while a voice whispered from the darkness, "Come home." The next night, the dream returned, more vivid. She could feel the chill of the air, smell the rot of the wood. And the voice was louder now, more urgent, "Come home." By the third night, Jennifer stopped sleeping altogether. Her days blurred together in a fog of anxiety and dread. She couldn't focus, couldn't eat. Every window in her grandmother's old house framed the silhouette of the Greaves house at the end of the street, standing silent, waiting. The townspeople hadn't changed much in the years Jennifer was gone. They still lowered their voices when talking about the house, still averted their eyes when passing it by. She tried asking around, what had become of it? Had anyone been inside recently? The answer was always the same, no one goes there. Not anymore. But Jennifer couldn't let it go. On her 5th night back, she found herself standing outside the wrought iron gate, the twisted metal rusted and brittle, its once ornate design now resembling a crown of thorns. The moon hung low, casting skeletal shadows across the overgrown lawn. The house loomed before her, its windows like blind, accusing eyes. She told herself she was just looking. That she would turn around any minute. But then, as if guided by something beyond her control, she noticed the gate was ajar. Just enough for her to slip through. The wind picked up, carrying with it a sound that made her blood run cold. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably human. A child's laughter, echoing from inside the house. Jennifer froze, her pulse pounding in her throat. Every logical part of her screamed to run, to put as much distance as possible between herself and that cursed place. But instead, she took a step forward. And then another. Because, deep down, Jennifer already knew the truth. She wasn't just curious. She was chosen. The moment Jennifer's fingers brushed against the rotted wood of the front door, something inside her shifted, like a dormant part of herself was waking up after years of slumber. The wood was damp and splintered, and as her hand pressed against it, the door creaked open without resistance. The air that hit her was ice-cold, stagnant, heavy with the stench of mold, rot, and something else, something coppery and sharp that sent her stomach lurching. The darkness inside was absolute, as though the house itself had swallowed all the light long ago. Jennifer hesitated on the threshold, her mind a battleground between reason and that unrelenting, primal pull. Her flashlight, trembling in her grip, cast a narrow, uncertain beam into the void. She took a cautious step inside, her foot sinking slightly into the warped floorboards. Behind her, the wind moaned through the trees, making the rusted gate creak on its hinges like an unseen spectator whispering, "You shouldn't be here." But Jennifer didn't turn back. The entry hall stretched before her like a blackened throat. Dust motes floated in the beam of her flashlight, thick and sluggish, as if even they struggled to move within the oppressive atmosphere. Faded family portraits lined the walls, their subjects' faces obscured by layers of grime and mildew, their eyes reduced to hollow voids that seemed to follow her every movement. Her steps echoed through the house in a slow, deliberate cadence that sounded far too loud in the suffocating silence. She paused beneath the grand staircase, its banister warped and splintered, draped with cobwebs thick as rope. The chandelier above was a mass of rusted metal and shattered glass, its once elegant crystals now jagged teeth poised to fall. Then, it happened. A sound. Not the moan of the old house settling, not the wind pressing against the walls. It was unmistakably human. A soft, fragile voice, barely above a whisper, coming from somewhere deep within the house. "Jennifer." Her breath caught violently in her throat. She spun around, the flashlight beams slicing wildly through the shadows, but there was nothing, no one. The voice had come from the parlor. She knew it, though she didn't know how. Swallowing hard, Jennifer forced her feet to move, the floorboards groaning louder beneath her weight as if warning her to stop. The parlor door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness peeking out. She pushed it open. The flashlight revealed a scene frozen in time, dusty furniture draped in yellowing sheets, a fireplace choked with ash, and above it, a massive, ornate mirror fractured in the center, a web of cracks radiating outward like veins. The voice came again, louder this time, and unmistakably hers. "Jennifer." Her own name, echoing from somewhere inside the walls. She stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor, its beam rolling wildly over the cracked wallpaper and splintered floorboards before settling on the fireplace. No. Not the fireplace. On what was inside it. A small, delicate handprint, smeared in something dark, almost black, pressed against the soot-streaked brick. It was fresh. Jennifer's pulse hammered violently in her chest. She bent down slowly, fingers trembling as she hovered near the print. The substance was viscous, still wet. Blood. That's when the piano started to play. From the corner of the parlor, long buried beneath dust and tattered sheets, a grand piano erupted into a discordant melody, its keys slamming down in a chaotic, frantic sequence that reverberated through the floorboards and walls. Jennifer screamed, stumbling backward into a chair that toppled under her weight, sending her sprawling to the floor. The piano stopped, abruptly. Dead silence. Her own ragged breathing filled the space, her heartbeat drumming violently in her ears. She scrambled to her feet, snatching the flashlight and backing toward the doorway, desperate to escape. But before she could reach it, the parlor door slammed shut on its own with a deafening crack, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. Jennifer hurled herself at the door, twisting the handle violently, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if it had fused to the frame, trapping her inside. Then, from behind her, the faintest sound. A breath. Exhaled slowly, deliberately, right at the nape of her neck. She froze, her entire body locking up in paralyzed terror. And then, a voice. Low, guttural, whispering two simple words into her ear. "You came." Jennifer shrieked and spun around, slashing the flashlight beam through the darkness. Nothing. Only the empty parlor, cloaked in shadows and silence once more. Her chest heaved as she pressed herself against the sealed door, tears welling in her eyes. Suddenly, from above, there was a loud crash, something massive toppling over, followed by heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing across the floorboards of the second story. Then another crash. And another. The house was coming alive around her, shaking off decades of stillness in a violent, angry convulsion. Jennifer's trembling fingers found the old brass key still wedged into the parlor door's lock. She twisted it desperately. For a horrifying moment, it resisted, but then, with a shuddering groan, the door gave way. She stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. But before she could even take a full step away from the parlor, every light in the house, ancient wall sconces, the broken chandelier above, flickered on simultaneously, casting the entire space in a sickly, yellow glow. And at the top of the staircase, there it stood. A figure. Tall, motionless, draped in shadows so dense that even the artificial light couldn't penetrate them. Jennifer's legs buckled as she stared up at the thing, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then, the figure tilted its head, slowly, curiously, and began to descend the stairs. One deliberate step at a time. The house had found her. Jennifer's lungs burned as she forced herself to move, staggering away from the base of the staircase as the figure descended with a calm, predatory grace. Each footstep echoed through the house like a death knell, sending vibrations through the floorboards and up into her bones. The figure didn't rush. It didn't need to. Jennifer bolted through the hallway, her flashlight beam swinging wildly as she ran, illuminating grotesque fragments of the house's decayed beauty, faded wallpaper peeling in long, skin-like strips, paintings with eyes that seemed to track her every movement, a grandfather clock, its face shattered, its pendulum still inexplicably swinging back and forth with mechanical determination. She turned a corner and burst into what must have once been a sitting room. Dust choked the air, and the skeletal remains of antique furniture stood like silent sentinels in the gloom. Her heart thudded violently against her ribcage as she pressed herself against the far wall, struggling to control her ragged breathing. Silence. For a moment, all she could hear was the frantic drum of her own pulse. Then, the faintest creak of the floorboards. Closer. She choked back a sob, her eyes scanning the room desperately for any possible exit. In the far corner, half obscured by a tattered velvet curtain, she spotted what looked like a doorway leading into another part of the house. She didn't hesitate. Jennifer sprinted across the room, throwing herself through the archway and into what had once been a dining hall. A long, dust-coated table stretched down the center of the room, surrounded by chairs in various states of disrepair. The walls were lined with shelves of tarnished silverware and decaying books. But what made her stop cold was the chandelier above the table. Its crystals, though caked in grime, were all violently swaying as though an unseen force had just brushed past them. But there was no wind. Jennifer's eyes widened as she realized what that meant. It was in the room with her. Before she could react, the doorway behind her slammed shut with a thunderous crack that reverberated through the cavernous space, rattling the shelves and sending a cascade of dust into the air. Jennifer screamed, running to the door and yanking violently at the handle, but it was as immovable as the parlor door had been. Suddenly, from the shadows at the far end of the table, a chair scraped backward slowly, the sound agonizingly deliberate. Jennifer froze, her blood running ice-cold as the chair continued to move, pulling itself away from the table as though inviting her to sit. "No," she whispered hoarsely, taking a step back. But then, a sickeningly familiar voice spoke from the darkness, from the very place where the chair had moved. "Come home, Jennifer." It was her grandmother's voice. Impossible. Jennifer spun around, her mind fracturing under the weight of terror and confusion. She had buried her grandmother weeks ago, she had seen the body, touched the cold skin. And yet, there it was again, softer now, more insistent. "Come home." The chandelier above flickered violently as a guttural growl rose from beneath the table, low and wet, vibrating the floor beneath her feet. Jennifer stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard and hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through her elbow, but she barely registered it as she scrambled away from the table, her eyes fixed on the shadows beneath it. Something was moving there. Slowly. Deliberately. Suddenly, the tablecloth began to lift, as if an unseen hand was drawing it back to reveal the monstrosity beneath. Jennifer didn't wait to see what it was. She bolted for the corner of the room where a second door stood ajar, its hinges rusted but mercifully unsealed. She tore through it, slamming it shut behind her and collapsing against it, her chest heaving violently. The room she had entered was small, an old servant's quarters, judging by the simple iron-framed bed and battered wardrobe pressed against the wall. For a moment, the house was silent again. Only the ticking of an old, forgotten clock on the mantel filled the space, its steady rhythm at odds with the chaos Jennifer had just fled. But as her breathing slowed and she allowed herself a moment of reprieve, she noticed something strange. The wardrobe door, it was slightly open. Jennifer stared at the dark crack, her skin prickling with cold sweat. No. Please, no. But even as she thought it, the wardrobe door creaked open wider and wider, until it stood fully ajar, revealing only the black void within. Jennifer's flashlight flickered and died. Complete darkness swallowed her whole. Then, a sound. From within the wardrobe. Not a voice this time. Something worse. Breathing. Shallow, ragged breathing, as though something enormous was trying to suppress the sound of its own existence. Jennifer couldn't move. Her entire body locked in place, every muscle screaming for her to run, but her mind paralyzed by the suffocating, predatory presence just feet away. Suddenly, two pale, skeletal hands shot out from the wardrobe, gripping the frame with an inhuman strength, splintering the old wood as they pulled the rest of the figure forward. Jennifer shrieked and threw herself at the door behind her, wrenching it open just as the thing began to emerge. She sprinted back into the hallway, slamming the door shut and collapsing against it, tears streaking down her face. But there was no time to rest. From the other end of the hall, the sound of footsteps, heavy, wet, dragging footsteps, began to approach. Jennifer forced herself to her feet, stumbling down the corridor, searching for an exit, any exit. She rounded a corner and found herself back in the entry hall, the front door still standing where she had left it. Salvation. She ran for it, her hands outstretched. But just as her fingers grazed the cold brass handle, the overhead chandelier crashed violently to the floor in front of her, shattering into 1,000 jagged shards that scattered across the warped wood. She screamed, stumbling backward as the house shuddered violently around her, plaster raining down from the ceiling. And then, from behind her, a voice. Soft. Childlike. Jennifer. She turned slowly, dread curdling in her stomach. At the base of the staircase stood a child. A little girl, no older than 6, wearing a tattered, turn-of-the-century dress stained with something dark. Her eyes were gone. Just empty, gaping sockets staring directly at Jennifer. The girl tilted her head, and smiled. Then, in that same hollow, innocent voice, she whispered, "You can't leave." And the front door slammed shut behind Jennifer, sealing her fate. Jennifer stood frozen, her back pressed against the now locked front door, her pulse pounding so violently it felt as if her heart would shatter through her ribs. The little girl with the eyeless sockets stood motionless at the base of the staircase, her eerie, empty grin stretched far too wide for her small, delicate face. The house was no longer just old wood and forgotten memories. It was alive. And it had her. Jennifer's mind screamed at her to move, to find another way out, but her legs refused to obey, paralyzed by the grotesque tableau before her. The girl tilted her head once more, as if studying Jennifer's terror, then slowly lifted one pale, skeletal hand and pointed toward the upper floor. Jennifer's eyes darted to where the child pointed. The figure from before, the tall, shadow-drenched entity, was now at the top of the staircase, leaning over the banister like a spider poised above a trapped fly. Its face, if it even had one, was hidden beneath the absolute blackness that clung to it like smoke. It raised an arm, elongated, bony, ending in fingers like broken twigs, and beckoned her. Jennifer let out a strangled sob, shaking her head violently. "No, please, no." But the house left no room for refusal. Suddenly, an unseen force gripped her ankles and wrists, dragging her violently across the splintered floorboards. She screamed, kicking and clawing at the air, her nails tearing against the rotting wood, leaving behind bloody streaks as she was hauled toward the base of the staircase. The little girl watched, unmoving, her smile never faltering. Jennifer's body was yanked upright and thrust onto the first step. Then another. Then another. It was forcing her up, step by agonizing step, toward the dark entity that waited above. The house groaned around her, as though savoring her fear, the walls pulsing with a low, guttural vibration that she could feel deep inside her skull. Halfway up the staircase, Jennifer's head snapped violently to the left as an unseen force struck her cheek, splitting her skin open. Warm blood streamed down her face, mixing with her tears. "Please, stop." But there was no mercy here. The chandelier above her sparked violently, raining down tiny shards of glass that embedded themselves in her arms and shoulders as she was dragged upward. At the top of the stairs, the figure extended both arms toward her, as if in a grotesque parody of an embrace. Jennifer's body convulsed in a last-ditch effort to resist, but her strength was gone. Then the figure spoke. Its voice was not one, but many, a chorus of whispers layered atop each other, male and female, young and old, all speaking the same words in perfect, horrifying unison. "Welcome home." And with that, it lunged forward, engulfing Jennifer in a suffocating shroud of cold darkness. She tried to scream, but no sound came out as the blackness poured into her mouth, her nose, her eyes, consuming her completely. Her body went limp as she was pulled through the rotting floorboards, disappearing into the very bones of the house. Silence. The air stilled. The lights flickered out one by one until only the faintest ember of the dying chandelier remained, casting a dim, sickly glow over the now empty staircase. But then, faint footsteps. Soft. Barefoot. Childlike. Descending the stairs. The little girl reappeared, her eyeless sockets now bleeding thick, black ichor that dripped onto her pale dress. She walked calmly across the floor, stepping over Jennifer's blood-streaked drag marks as if they weren't even there. She approached the front door, placed her tiny hand against the cold brass handle, and turned it. The door creaked open without resistance. Outside, the storm had passed. The night was still. The girl stepped out onto the porch and turned to look back at the house. For a moment, everything was utterly silent. Then, from deep within the walls, a single, muffled scream, Jennifer's, echoed out into the night, reverberating through the trees before fading into nothing. The girl smiled. And gently, she closed the door. The lock clicked shut on its own. And the house waited. Again. Days passed. Weeks. But no one came looking for Jennifer. The old house at the end of the street stood silent as always, its windows dark, its doors tightly shut, as though it had never been touched by human presence in decades. The vines crept higher up the crumbling facade, the wood rotted further, and the wind whispered through the broken shingles. But something had changed. If one stood at the end of the gravel path at just the right hour, when the moon hung low and pale over the trees, you could hear it. Faintly. A woman's voice, carried by the breeze. Sometimes sobbing. Sometimes screaming. But always, trapped. Jennifer's story became just another unspoken legend in the quiet town, one more cautionary tale told in hushed voices around campfires and in darkened bedrooms. Don't go to the house at the end of the street. But no one really believed it. No one ever does. Until they see the lights flicker behind those boarded-up windows, or hear the soft giggle of a little girl coming from the shadows of the overgrown garden. Or worse, until they hear their own name being whispered, from inside the house. Because that's the thing about places like this, they don't just consume the living, they mimic them. They become them. If you listen closely, late at night, you might even hear Jennifer's voice calling out, begging for help. But by then, it's already too late. The house has chosen you. And once it does, you never leave. Not really. The front door might open for you. You might step out, thinking you've escaped. But the moment your foot touches the old creaking porch, you realize. You're still inside. You always will be. Because the house at the end of the street doesn't just trap the body. It traps the soul. Forever. So, next time you pass that crumbling house on the edge of town, ask yourself, do you hear it calling? And if you do, will you answer?